Welcome back to BNG Hockey, where it's always black and gold. The Boston Bruins win Game 5 by a score of 3-1, and they advance to the second round. In this video, I'm going to recap the entire Bruins vs. Capitals series. We're going to talk about what went right for both teams, what went wrong for both teams, and talk about the road ahead for the Boston Bruins. Let's get started. We're going to start things off by talking about goaltending. I did mention in my preview video that goaltending would be a pretty big factor in this series, but I didn't realize how crazy the goaltending situation would get for the Washington Capitals. Right off the bat, they lose Vitek Vanacek. That's a really tough blow, and now they're forced to turn to Craig Anderson. I did mention that he was nothing like he used to be, and we really wouldn't have to worry about them. That kind of backfired on me a little bit when he grabs a win in Game 1. But overall, the Bruins didn't really test him. Same thing in Game 2. He didn't show that great of a performance, and it gets him pulled eventually. Samsonov comes off of COVID protocol. They probably would have gone with Samsonov anyway, but you do have to wonder if you have a veteran goaltender, if he doesn't make the same mistakes that Samsonov made. Overall, Samsonov played pretty well. He had that really bad mistake to Craig Smith on the overtime goal. Not enough people are giving Smitty credit there. It was a great hustle play to get to that puck and realize the confusion. There should be a little blame on Justin Schultz as well there. Maybe not communicating with his young goaltender. But you have to wonder, does Craig Anderson even go out to play that puck? Maybe he doesn't make that mistake. That was a huge turning point. That's a big win for the Bruins to steal that game. And as I mentioned before, I thought Samsonov played pretty well. I really think that the reason the Capitals lost this series was more because of their scoring. But before we talk about that, we have to talk about the other side of the goaltending, Tuukka Rask. It's always an interesting conversation when you're talking Tuukka Rask here in Boston. There's people who love him, there's people who hate him, there's people who are in between. And there's also people who are excited to see Jeremy Swayman. Honestly, I'm really excited to see the kid play too, and I mentioned that he could potentially be a player in this series if Rask starts to falter a little bit, but I think we can all agree, no matter how you feel about Rask and how excited you are about Swayman, Rask was fantastic in this series. Overall, he just did his job. Now, I will give some credit to the Bruins defense. They played fantastic in this series, making sure the Washington Capitals didn't have time to set up. They were blocking shots. Once again, the Bruins' penalty kill was pretty good. That's a lethal power play that the Washington Capitals have, and they have some elite level forwards all throughout their lineup. So it's not an easy job, and Rask definitely looked good because of the defense at times, but he certainly made some pretty big saves, and he made the easy saves that you need him to make. And they're not always that easy when it comes to playoff time. There's always a lot more chaos, there's always a lot more bodies in front of the net, and sometimes an easy shot goes in. And we can debate about some of the goals he did let in. We can do that till we're blue in the face, but overall, I think we can all agree, no matter how you feel about Rask, he did his job, he helped the team win, and was definitely a factor in the Bruins being able to shut down the Capitals at times. And even though these games were close, you need your goalie to step up big for you at certain moments, and certainly Tuukka Rask did that. I mentioned before that I think one of the biggest reasons the Capitals lost this series was their scoring, and you can start out by looking at the grade 8, their captain, Alex Ovechkin, who only had 2 goals in this series, and I realize it was only a 5-game series, and there's plenty of Bruins who have 2 goals or less, but this is Alex Ovechkin we're talking about. Some people call him the greatest goal scorer of all time. So if he's not out there scoring goals, he really kind of becomes useless. He's not the best two-way player. Certainly he's physical and can help out in other aspects of the game, but at the end of the day, he's out there to score goals. And should I mention that one of those 2 goals trickled off Brandon Carlo's stick and was credited to Alex Ovechkin. So really, he only had 1 legit goal. And that's just not good enough from your captain, and not good enough from a guy who's capable of scoring over 50 goals in a season and could be getting you 10 goals in a playoff series. It's not the craziest thing to expect from this kind of player, but he's not alone in this, and it doesn't all go on him. They traded for a guy like Anthony Mantha. He didn't have the best series. Nicklas Backstrom was a ghost almost the entire series. Evgeny Kuznetsov comes off a COVID protocol. He wasn't that great. And even a guy like Tom Wilson. I'll admit it, you can go back and look at my preview video. I thought this guy was going to be a factor, and I was really worried about him. He's really unpredictable. He's always doing stupid stuff, hurting people, playing physical, playing hard, but he's also a really good hockey player, and we saw that right off the bat in this series. Charlie McAvoy breaks a stick. They come back the other way. Great little give-and-go play with TJ Oshie, and Wilson absolutely picks a corner for the very first goal in the series, and I thought, here we go. This guy already has a couple of hits. He has a great goal, and the Bruins are really in trouble because I don't know if they have an answer for this guy. And that was really the last time we heard from Tom Wilson the rest of the series. He didn't do anything suspension worthy. He didn't really have those really big hits. He did send Lauzon into the bench and definitely played in these games and was a little more involved than some of the other top Capitals. But overall, he wasn't the Tom Wilson I was expecting, and maybe that's a good thing. I'm really glad that no Bruin got hurt, and I'm not denying that Tom Wilson is definitely a very good hockey player. But that was just once again another guy I felt disappointed for the Capitals and could have gave them more. And when the games got out of hand or the Bruins started to run away with things, I kind of expected him to goon it up a little bit, and he kind of just disappeared like the rest of the top Capitals. Their best line was their fourth line. Hagelin, Hathaway, and Dowd found a way to bring it into the offensive zone pretty much on every shift. They played fast, they played hard, they scored some goals. They were the most effective line and the most consistent line of all 5 games for the Capitals by far. And that's a good thing. You want your fourth line to be good. You want to have depth. That's part of the reason why people thought the Capitals were a contender coming into this playoff. So they definitely showed up, but unfortunately for them, the other 9 forwards did not. Not only did the forwards not show up, but the defense wasn't that great either. So I guess what I'm saying at this point is the Capitals didn't show up unless it was their goaltenders. On the defense side of things, John Carlson is a Norris caliber defenseman, and he sure didn't seem like it. He was playing just as many big minutes, he was getting top power play time, but really wasn't that much of a factor in the game. Now, a lot of these guys were banged up. I know Carlson was one of those guys, so maybe we find out that all of these guys were battling injuries. That could definitely be a factor, but once again, John Carlson is talked about as one of the best defensemen in the league, and I don't feel like I saw that from him. I probably thought Orlov was their best defenseman. I thought the pair of Schultz and Dillon really got exposed. And then the third D pair, we do have to talk about it, Bruins fans, Nick Jensen and former captain Zdeno Chara. There's no way around it. This was weird, and you kind of forgot about it. We played him all year, so you figured it would be normal at this point, but then watching him in that handshake line, that pulls at your heartstrings a little bit. You could see that he was visibly upset. Seeing him interact with his former Bruins teammates was a really cool thing. Chara's one of the nicest guys in all of sports, so I'm sure he wished them nothing but good luck, but you have to feel bad for the big guy there. You were watching the Bruins celebrate. That's his former team. Now he's on the losing side of that. He kind of got exposed a little bit, and I was one of those guys who just wanted him to retire, so this was really hard for me. I wanted him to just go out as a Bruin. I hate watching guys' games fall off as much as Chara's has. He was a Norris caliber defenseman, an absolute stud. His numbers going in the rafters, and that's the guy I want to remember. I don't want to see him with another team. He's still a Bruin. Obviously, nothing changes. Him playing a couple of years with the Capitals, even if this is his only year with the Capitals, won't change that, but it was really tough to watch him in this series because we were once again reminded how tough it is to have an old Zdeno Chara on your team. You watch a guy like Nick Jensen, kind of have to protect him at times. I know Charlie McAvoy learned a lot from Zdeno Chara, but pretty quickly it became McAvoy ran that D pair and protected Zdeno Chara, and once again you were seeing that with a much lesser defenseman, Nick Jensen, so I kind of felt bad for Jensen there. It was also awkward for the Capitals. There's always that question, do we scratch Zdeno Chara? How do you scratch a legend like that who's played in that many playoff games, has that much experience, can still help out on the penalty kill, he was still physical, but overall, the Capitals are a really slow lineup, and he just made them slower. And they were kind of sheltering him. They tried to keep him away from the Bruins' top 2 lines. But eventually, if you're playing him on your bench and he's one of your 6 defensemen, you got to get him out there, and he was definitely getting exposed. So overall, it's a bittersweet feeling. We're all Bruins fans. We're all psyched that we beat the Capitals. Overall, there's not a lot of guys I like on the Washington Capitals, so I was especially excited to beat them. But you got to feel bad for Chara a little bit, and you do kind of wish that he just retired, and you are seeing why Don Sweeney moved on from Zdeno Chara. He had a much faster back end. The young guys were coming in. You're able to bring in a guy like Mike Reilly, and if Chara was here, who knows? Maybe this series is a lot different, and the Capitals are taking advantage of Zdeno Chara if he's on our team. So overall, that was an interesting storyline. It's been talked about a lot, but I wanted to mention it here on the channel. Feel bad for the big guy and appreciate everything he's done. I'm sure that's always been said. So Z, you'll always be a Bruin, and thanks for letting us expose you. I'll be talking a lot more about the Boston Bruins side of things in my preview for the next series, but I did want to dive into a little bit of it now and also talk about a couple of players I thought had the biggest impact on this series, and then we'll talk about the road ahead. In my preview for this series, I did mention that I thought injuries would be a factor. When you're playing a physical team like the Capitals, you would think that injuries would start to pile up, and luckily for the Bruins, knock on wood, they really didn't. They did lose Jeremy Lauzon right off the bat. He blocked a shot with his hand, but hopefully that's on the mend. They lost Kevin Miller off a high hit from Dmitry Orlov. I really didn't like that play by Orlov. I was kind of hoping he would get a suspension. I felt like he left his skates, definitely felt like he targeted the head, and that's concerning if you're a Bruins fan. You never want to see anyone go down, but especially a guy like Miller with his long injury history. Hopefully he'll be back soon as well. They also lost Steven Kampfer. It was non-related to the series. I believe it's an arm injury, but there was a guy who had to step up pretty quickly when Lauzon came out of the lineup, and then also play some bigger minutes when Kevin Miller was out of the lineup, and that's Connor Clifton. Overall, he had an up and down year. At times, he was playing Cliffy hockey, as they say, and looking really good out there and having an impact on the game. And then at times, he was looking like a 7th, 8th defenseman who they really didn't need. And he came right into this series, right off the bat, brought energy, played physical, and was blocking shots. Him and Carlo were absolute monsters, blocking shots from Alex Ovechkin. I don't know about you guys, but I wouldn't be looking forward to blocking any kind of shot from anyone, especially an Alex Ovechkin blast. So I was really impressed with Connor Clifton. As I mentioned before, his year was kind of up and down. He gets thrown right into this series against a really good team with some bigger guys. He's on the smaller side, but plays a little chippy. I thought he was fantastic throughout this series and definitely a surprise factor. While we're talking about the Bruins back end, we have to talk about the D pair of Charlie McAvoy and Matt Grzelcyk. We all know that Charlie McAvoy is our #1 stud. He's gonna win a Norris someday, and this kid just keeps getting better and better. When you're on the ice with a guy like John Carlson, and you're still the best defenseman on the ice, that shows how far McAvoy's game has come, and he just continues to get better and better. We finally see him playing a little bit more offensively, getting some time there on the top unit with the Bergeron line on the power play. I know that Matt Grzelcyk is a really good power play QB, but almost every team has their top defenseman on their top power play, especially in the playoffs. So finally we see Bruce Cassidy playing around with that, and it paid off. Charlie McAvoy had that 3-assist game, so he continues to show that he can help out offensively and not sacrifice anything in the defensive end while playing big minutes. And not far behind him is the severely underrated Matt Grzelcyk. I have been a Grzelcyk fan for a long time. I said it right off the bat that you can get rid of Torrey Krug because Matt Grzelcyk can do everything Krug can, if not better, and is a lot better in his own end. We just saw the St. Louis Blues get swept, by the way, so clearly Torrey Krug can't be the #1 defenseman on a team. Moving back to Matt Grzelcyk, he is just a fantastic overall defenseman. We saw him have an absolute bomb, so he has a great shot, always gets pucks to the net. His first pass is up there with any offensive defenseman in the entire league, and the two of these guys together just work so well offensively, defensively, and they communicate perfectly. They've played with each other for a long time, so I know they've experimented with a lot of D pairs, and this D pair has been together a couple times this season, but I'm telling Bruce, and I'm telling Bruins fans, we need to keep this D pair together for a long time, because together, I put them up there with any other first D pair in the league. Lastly, I want to give a shout out to the Bruins forwards. As I mentioned before, I thought the Capitals' lack of scoring really hurt them. And on the other hand, even though these were close games, I thought the Bruins' depth scoring was a huge factor in this series. And you have to start out with my man, Taylor Hall. That boy is a Bruin, and that goal he scored in Game 3 was unreal. That's why you bring in Taylor Hall, for that speed, that skill, and those kinds of goals, because that came up clutch for the Bruins, and you don't find many guys in the league who can do that, never mind on the Bruins roster. He's really elevated that second line. Krejci continues to play well. Craig Smith is just a guy who's born to play playoff hockey. He plays hard every shift, got that huge overtime winner for us. So the second line continues to be arguably our best line after the trade deadline. The Bergeron line had a rocky start to this series, but really came around and played perfection line hockey, as they say. They were all fantastic by the end of this series, really sealing the deal here in this last game with Bergeron and Pastrnak, coming up with some beautiful goals. And I have to mention two guys who I've kind of bashed all year, Jake DeBrusk, and Charlie Coyle. I love Charlie Coyle, but this was a really down year for him, and at times he was practically invisible, and that can't happen with his cap hit. But just like Craig Smith, this is a guy who's built for playoff hockey. He has size, he has speed, he gets to the front of the net, and he scores some big goals. We've seen him do that already in a black and gold uniform, and he was definitely looking like Charlie Coyle once again in this series. And if you have Coyle playing at his best, and he's your third line center, that means you have a really good hockey team. And he also had Jake DeBrusk playing with him, who finally looked like Jake DeBrusk. We haven't seen that from him all year. You guys know, if you've watched the channel, I was trying to trade him out of here. I know a lot of Bruins fans were really frustrated. I know the Bruins were really frustrated. This is a guy who can play some really impactful hockey and looks like a guy who can be a top 6 winger at times, and then he looks like a guy who shouldn't even be in the lineup. So finally, I don't need him to score every night, but I need him to bring that energy, which he brought in this series, speed, which he brought in this series, little bit of physicality and snarl, and getting to the front of the net and getting some dirty goals, chipped in a couple of goals, big goals right away, right out of the series. He came out flying and playing Jake DeBrusk hockey. He has been known to elevate his game in the playoffs, so that was great to see, and hopefully that carries over in the future, because this could still be a pretty big player for the Boston Bruins. Put the two of them with Nick Ritchie, who was one of your best goal scorers this season, and you just have even more depth. So overall, that was pretty easy. I was genuinely surprised that the Bruins were able to take care of the Capitals like they did. It was scary after that first game. They couldn't really test Craig Anderson. You were wondering if the Capitals were just going to be too much for us. And if you can't beat their third string goalie, how would you do when another goalie comes back? But the Bruins were really just trying to play Capitals hockey in that first game. And then I think they started to realize if they play Bruins style of hockey, that would be a lot better suited because they're the Bruins. So I thought once they started to play towards their own identity, still playing a little physical and still playing some Capitals hockey, but using their speed, using their skill, that helped them a lot more, and then the series was over. You get some great goaltending from Rask, you get some solid defensive play, combine that with the skill that you've had since the trade deadline, and you have the depth to do so, and the Bruins look like an absolute wagon. So we're going to get one of Pittsburgh or the Islanders. That series is currently tied up 2-2. Hopefully those teams keep battling. I would love to see that series go to 7. You don't always want your team to wait around too much. You don't want them to get stale, but I do want the Bruins to have some time to heal. They do have a couple of injuries. There's probably a couple of guys who we don't know are injured, so let's give them some time. And honestly, just let the Penguins and the Islanders beat up on each other for a couple of more games and then come into a series with the Bruins right after, because then they'll be a lot more vulnerable. And honestly, I was most afraid of the Capitals out of these 3 teams, so you can give me any one of the Islanders or the Penguins. The Islanders are probably more frustrating to play with their system. The Penguins are probably a little more open but have a little more skill. But either way, I think the Bruins will be able to take down either of those teams, and I definitely think with how easily they were able to knock off the Capitals, that's a good sign for the Bruins moving forward. The Boston Bruins are moving on to round 2. Let me know who you want to play down below in the comments. Also, let me know your thoughts on the Bruins vs. Capitals series. What went right for the Bruins? What went wrong for the Capitals? Leave all of that down below. If you enjoyed this video and you're pumped for round 2, make sure to give it a big like. And if you haven't already, subscribe.